Hey everybody, I'm Dan Lapel from New Focus Recordings. Happy to be joined by Finola Merivale. She put out a really great record a few months ago in June, Tous,
Yeah.
FCR327, and it's a great snapshot of a bunch of her work over several years. But in some ways, one of the really standout things about it is a focus on collaboration with the New York-based Desdemona Ensemble over a long period of time, and different looks at your music, different looks at their various ways of sort of performance practice, and it's great. Congrats! I'm glad we finally were able to sort of connect after a summer of travels and whatever to do a chat.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, sure. Do you want to maybe give our voluminous fans out in YouTube world a bit of an overview on the trajectory of some of this repertoire?
Yeah, so we all recorded it between I think June last year, so June 2021, until October, and it's 5 pieces, but they're actually written over the past 9 years. It suddenly feels like a really long time. So because I really wanted to work closely with Desdemona, who had been kind of really crucial bringing some of these works to life, even though none of the works on the album were actually written for them, but some of them, like I worked really closely with them, and they performed. There's a string quartet at the very end of the album called The Language of Mountains is Rain, and they had taken that on kind of years after it was composed, and then like toured it a little bit and played it a lot, so they knew that one really well. So it felt like working with them on this album was a really nice opportunity. And then it means all the pieces are all for strings, and one piece includes piano. They're a string quintet. They have mainly string quartet and then a pianist as well. And yeah, I got a grant in Ireland. I'm from Ireland, and there was a music recording grant which I was lucky enough to get in 2020, I guess, 2021. The years of the pandemic are a blur, but it just gave me the sort of financial opportunity to produce this, which was just really an amazing opportunity.
Yeah, great. Well, let's focus a little bit on some of the specific pieces. Maybe we start with the first track, "Do You Hear Me Now," which is a bit of a sort of like cathartic scream. it, directed probably at multiple places, but maybe specifically, I mean, I feel like over the years I've encountered a lot of pieces by graduate school composers that are a little bit like their escape piece, or like this sort of like pushing up against the walls. Magnus Lindberg has a great piece that I played with Ice many times, Linnea D'Ombra. And at some point, like when we played the piece and he did a little interview at Miller Theater, he sort of said a similar thing. It may have been that he wrote it right after he finished school, but it was like a similar sort of like, I need to just like burst out of all the things that I feel like are constraining me. Is that I mean, I'm sort of basing that on the notes that you wrote.
Yeah.
But,
I sometimes joke that it's like 17 minutes of wailing.
yeah.
It's not just, I mean, it's not really about academia, but it's about, well, it's about the sort of misogyny I have been a sort of victim of, I guess, through my whole career. So this was actually written my very first year. I'm at Columbia University now, doing my doctorate there, and in my final year. And I wrote this in my very first year at Columbia. I was studying with Sasha De Castri, who's an absolutely amazing composer. But I had just come out of a different school that had not been the most supportive experience, and this was kind of, I didn't even realize it at the I think I realized halfway through that it just felt like all this rage pouring out. And then, not just about even that school, but just about kind of
Sure.
processing a lot of different experiences and comments that had been said to me over the years about being a woman in new music. And often when I was only 21 and 22 and still really young and at a point where it would have been very, very easy to just give up and decide there's no space for me in this world.
Uh,
Luckily, I kept going, but I think
oh,
that
yeah,
piece
I'm
is
glad
like,
you did. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no, that's really, and I should correct something I said, that the program notes were by Robin Smith. So that's where I got the initial
yeah,
idea. But of course, I mean, you only need to listen to the music to sort of sense that there's a sort of a furious sort of quality to it, and yeah. Well, let's take a listen to a 1 minute excerpt of the first piece. Do you hear me now? And we're listening to Adrienne Munden Dixon on violin, Carrie Fry on viola, and Julia Henderson on cello. Great. Yeah, there's this sort of intense activation of that sort of sound mass, all the high register activity, and it's like it's really relentless for what the piece is 17
17
minutes.
minutes. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's not many lulls. I was also, when writing it, I was really I feel like in my music a lot of the time I'm really thinking about the energy created, and often that's created by, even the musicians on stage. And even there's moments in this where it does have a lull, but actually there's still huge amounts of activity happening for the performers. I think this is probably my most difficult piece for performers to take on, and Desdemona have been amazing collaborators in that, in like really bringing it to life and giving it their all, because they don't really get to take a breath for like the whole 17 minutes really.
Yeah, there's an endurance component to it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, the next track is actually really contrasting. It's for violin electronics, Arboris Aramus, and
Yeah.
features Adrienne Munden Dixon again. And you're playing the electronics part. Is it live electronics or fixed media?
It's live. Actually, usually when it's often just triggered by the musician. Often people play it on Ableton. The electronics are quite simple, really. It's lots of
Yeah.
loops and reverb and delay.
Cool. And talk a little bit about the notational strategy on this piece.
Yeah, this one is really, really open. It's just cells of material, and the idea is that the performer plays through the cell as it's written, but then goes back and kind of improvises around what has been written, in kind of any way they wish. I really give the performer a lot of freedom in this, but it's sort of structured around these cells, and that kind of gives the linear structure as well.
Mm.
And Adrienne was, again, this is one, it wasn't written for Desdemona, but it was a piece I actually wrote years ago and then just left, and it was never performed until Adrienne premiered it 3 years ago. So she's a fantastic improviser as well, and she loves working with electronics. She loves working with Ableton. So she was a really great collaborator to put this together. And yeah, so we worked on it really closely, and she gets to like improvise around it, around all the material as well.
That's great. I played. I'm not recalling the name of the piece, but I played with Ice. I played a piece of yours that was maybe
Yeah,
exactly the same, but it had this similar sort of open approach
Falling
to,
Flames.
yes, to cell
Yeah,
playing. And but I thought it was great, and I thought you struck a balance, and I feel I hear this here in this piece, even though I haven't seen the score, between freedom and sort of still having like a guiding hand structurally. And I'm interested in how do you think about that? Because I think that's actually a really an important challenge, given how many and an important thing to sort of investigate, because so many people are writing pieces that have slight, some open elements. But the question then becomes, how do you make decisions with the open elements to sort of still guarantee that the piece has its own character, and then have some sort of like a guiding influence
Mhm.
in how things, even as you still facilitate that freedom. I'm interested in hearing you talk about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting balance to strike. I love being able to be surprised while also really hearing the essence of the piece, no matter who's, which different sort of group is performing it.
Yeah.
So, and I think for me, the way I do it is that because I do have these cells of, rhythmic and melodic notation that is quite precise, that whoever plays it and whoever kind of treats the material differently or improvises in different ways around it, you'll still hear that in it. So for example, Falling Flames has actually less freedom. It's more like repeated cells. It's kind of notated a bit like Terry Riley's in C, where you repeat them and you can work your way through the score, but you can jump back to previous moments. But I've heard, pieces like when I did it, it was like a big ensemble of lots of different instruments. I've worked on it with percussion groups, so there's loads of, unpitched percussion, which isn't necessarily on the score, but they're, improvising around the rhythms that they see. And then I've seen soloists do it as well, which is a very different, different sound again. And then with Arboris Erimus, I think that gives the performers like a little bit more freedom. Like Adrienne had this beautiful idea to kind of do a whole cadenza in the middle of it, and the piece has lots of electronics, but in this section, all the electronics go away, and it's just this acoustic cadenza, which I think was such a beautiful idea. And as soon as she worked through that idea with me, I really wanted to go with that. So it's just a nice example of me still hearing the music that's written, but also like allowing the performer to kind of take it on and bring me ideas, and me being really open to hearing how people are inspired by the material in potentially in ways that I hadn't thought about in advance.
Yeah, it's funny. I hadn't really thought much about this analogy previously, but listening to you talk, it reminds me a little bit about, or a little bit of, the way a jazz standard sort of, it might be played in any number of contexts, and then but still has the quality of like all the things you are-ness. You might
Yeah.
hear vibraphone player play that, or you might hear like a quartet play that,
Mhm.
and of course any number of different things can happen, but the given material is going to suggest certain things, it's going to pop up in certain ways. And I think in the case of the kind of score that you're talking about, probably the possibilities are somewhat more restricted by the actual cell material
Mhm.
that's given. But I don't know, it's sort of an interesting analogy to think of. It's almost like it's the head, the
Yeah.
cell head,
I'd never thought about it like that either, but it's a good analogy.
Yeah.
And it's
But
interesting because something like the other pieces on the album are so strictly notated, and there's not really any
yeah,
room. So it's like sometimes I go this really open way, and then other times there's just no room for kind of any sort
of
of
course.
freedom for
Yeah,
the
yeah. Well, and I
performers.
think as a listener, even not knowing what the score looks like, you sense that different kind of energy coming in track two, which is
Yeah,
great as a sort of an exhalation after the intensity of the first track. So
yeah.
uh I don't think we've listened to any of this yet. We've just been talking about
Okay.
it. Let's take a listen to a minute of Arboris Aramis. Great. Well, I think another sort of clear pillar and a contrasting type of music that happens on the recording is the last track for string quartet. The language of mountains is rain. You wrote this when you were living in Hong Kong, actually, right?
Yeah, I was teaching English there for 2 years.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Uh,
trying to compose at the weekends.
oh yeah. Well, I mean, were you at all hooked into the new music scene in Hong Kong? I don't really know much. I know there's this one guy, William Lane, who does a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I was just gonna
Yeah,
say I knew William Lane.
yeah, yeah.
He runs the Hong Kong New Music Ensemble, and I went to lots of concerts, but I had one concert over there, but it was during that time I also came here for a whole summer, and I did the Bang on a Can festival, and I had a few concerts around here during like
Cool.
one of those summers. So I was trying to make sure I was still, writing music and not letting that career sort of disappear while I was teaching kindergarten like 40 hours a week.
Oh wow, that's intense.
Yeah.
I mean, in what ways did you feel like, if any, that living there and the sort of environment might have shaped this piece?
So when I started writing the piece, I was reading a book by David Mitchell, called Number Nine Dream. He's like very famous for Cloud Atlas, and this is one of his other novels that I absolutely adored. And one of the chapters was called "The Language of Mountains is Rain," and it was just as I'd started trying to write these string quartet sketches, and I found that title so evocative for where I was. It was just in Hong Kong, you're in this hugely, overpopulated city with so many high rises. But wherever you look, you can always see the sea or the mountains or both, because it is still quite a small island. And, the island of Hong Kong itself is very mountainous. Sometimes you'd look behind you and see these hills, but barely, you wouldn't be able to see the top of it because they'd so often be covered in fog. And then you could often get these little boats to other islands. And then the title also reminded me of home. So I was, across the world, literally from home. And I'm from Cork, only about 15 minutes from the city. But then if I drive for an hour, I'm in like the mountainous region of West Cork and Kerry, which is beautiful and right by the coast as well. And then also often covered in rain because it's Ireland. So even though like Hong Kong and Ireland could just not be more different, and even landscape wise, it's not at all that they're similar, but there was this idea of like mountains and the rain and these foggy mountains surrounding me that was very evocative of both places.
Cool. And it's somewhat buried, right? But uh there are fragments of a traditional Irish melody that make their way into
Yeah,
the.
I think it's like the first and only time I looked at traditional Irish music in my own work. Maybe it was again to do with being so far away and like looking to home. But also,
Is that
thinking about.
in? Oh, so go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, well, I was just gonna say the string instruments, like, the fiddling, the fiddles in Ireland, and just thinking about ornamentation and in it's quite subtle. There's a moment on cello where you kind of start to hear this more traditional element coming out, but sometimes it's harmonies from a couple of famous tunes that are like embedded within the harmonic world. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
No, I was just interested that you said that it's the first time that you'd ever done something like that, like drawn from a traditional Irish
Yeah.
source. And I'm wondering if there was any sort of reason behind that, or was just something that just never you had never sort of been compelled to do. Or is that, or actually, let me put it differently. Is Would you say that you generally don't like to work with quotes or like pre-existing material overall, or is it limited to sources from Ireland or?
It's an interesting question. I don't think it's ever been like a decision not to. When I was an undergrad and first studying composition, I was actually studying loads of gamelan and North Indian classical music. And in my undergrad, I learned loads about like West African drumming, and I was learning about all these cultures around the world, but never really looking at my own tradition really
Hmm.
closely. Um, so I think maybe it was to do with, it was a couple of years after I'd finished my master's, and I just was thinking like maybe I should learn more about my own tradition as well. I'd never sort of been like a traditional music performer, the way some people are. I'd grown up playing like classical piano.
Yeah.
Um, so maybe it was just the timing of it and the fact that I was very far away for the
Yeah.
first time.
There was a sort of a nostalgic
Yeah.
longing component there. Yeah. Well, it's, I imagine that, so, I mean, it's been how long since you were living in Ireland? Like as a permanent,
Then or
what's
now?
now?
Then or now? Now, well, technically I left when I was 21, so about 13 or 14 years, but I've been home a lot. Like I was home all summer. I was
Right.
home for about a year during the pandemic. When the pandemic first hit New York, I packed up the apartment I'd been in for 3 years and got me and the cat home. I thought my parents' beautiful house in the countryside might be a nicer place to be
I think
locked
you were right.
down.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm wondering whether or not you're sort of physically there or not. There is a thing uh, that I suspect happens in not just in New York, but in any sort of major cosmopolitan city where there's a lot of artists who are coming from all over the world, where somebody gets labeled as, Irish composer, and then there's an expectation that, like, on some level you're drawing from,
Mhm.
from Ireland or from Irish music. But in your case, and I think in many composers and artists in general cases, there's really no drawing from the native culture at all, and that's of course fine. Uh,
Yeah.
have you ever felt like there was that expectation, and that you sort of had to be like, well, actually, I'm not really thinking like on those lines, or
Sometimes I remember sometimes, especially once I moved away, people being like surprised that I didn't, grow up playing traditional music, like playing the fiddle or something, as though like every musician in Ireland only does this one path. And
right?
I guess that, that idea can happen with so many different cultures around the world. And I remember once being introduced as like a composer who was researching traditional Irish music or something, and I was like, "What?"
Right.
um,
Yeah.
it's funny now, as maybe as I'm getting older or something, I'm looking at it again. Like for my, I had to do for one of my sort of qualifying exams. I looked at Donncha Dennehy's piece, Grá agus Bás, which is an amazing piece. Um, it means it's the Irish for love and death, and it's, for people who don't know it, it uses a sean-nós singer, so a traditional Irish singer. Iarla Leonard premiered it and worked on it really closely with Donncha. And then for ensemble, like contemporary ensemble, and it very much has, it's a big contemporary music piece, but with these traditional singing elements, and it's absolutely stunning. So I worked on that and like delved into the Irish language being used. And then I've just finished an opera that uses Irish and English language like woven in together. So I worked with this amazing librettist called Jodie O'Neill, and she speaks Irish and English, and she just wrote the most beautiful poetic libretto where like sentences would start in Irish but finish in English and vice versa. Um, so I don't know, maybe it's I've been gone too long and I'm trying to
Yeah.
reconnect, or just bring that part of me to the fore more, maybe.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's very fascinating, the various different ways that people can engage with in a way that isn't so pat. I think like
Mm.
the sort of marketing engine that exists everywhere, and it is what it is, and it's fine. I mean, it tends to sort of want to lump everything into something that's like extremely sort of predictable. Oh, well, okay, she's an Irish composer, so we're going to hear like fiddling tunes or whatever.
Yeah.
But the kinds of things that you're talking about engaging with are actually, they're much richer, and I think probably much more enlightening for people who don't have as much touch points with Irish language and you know, Irish music in general.
Yeah.
So it's great.
And I think for me, it's in this piece, definitely the string quartet, I kind of wanted it to be subtle. I didn't want it to be like, bam, here's your Irish melody, and then let's move on to other material.
Yeah.
And I think,
I mean, you can listen to this piece and not know that that's there at all. You
yeah,
might just
definitely.
sense a hint of something that is a little bit, you know, more folkloric in quality, or like, you know, some kind of harmonic illusion that suggests that something is slightly more consonant for a moment.
Yeah.
I don't think we've listened to this one yet
Oh,
either.
yeah.
So let's take a
Okay.
listen for a minute to The Language of Mountains is Rain. And this is the core string quartet drawn from Desdemona. So Adrienne Munden Dixon on violin, Caroline Drexler on violin, Carrie Fry on viola, and Julia Henderson on cello. Great. Well, it was so nice to finally get a chance to chat about some of these pieces, and I want to make sure to mention some of the other folks involved in the production before I forget. You produced it with Mike Tierney. Mike Tierney also recorded tracks 1 through 4, and Murat Kolak recorded the last track, track 5, and also edited, mixed, and mastered by Mike Tierney. And as I mentioned before, Robin Smith wrote some really great program notes, and Mark Wolf did the design. And we've got some beautiful artwork by Tamsin Merivale, I'm
My
assuming
sister.
great.
Yeah.
And a photo credit, Emma O'Halloran. And some shout outs to some institutions: Arts Council of Ireland commissioned Release, and West Cork Chamber Music Festival commissioned Silent Sweep As You Stand Still. Am I missing anything? Looks like
No.
Arts Council of Ireland was also involved in Do You Hear Me Now?
Yeah, and the award I got to produce the album was funded by the National Concert Hall and Sounding the Feminists in Ireland. So I'm very grateful for them. Otherwise, there would be no album.
There would be no album. Cool, but there is an album, and
Yeah.
it's an album that you should go and check out and listen to. And it's available on streaming platforms. It's also available on Bandcamp, and it's also available in physical format, CD format. FCR327 Finola Merivale's Tous, and take a listen. And thank you so much, Finola, for hopping on Zoom.
Thank you so much. Thanks for producing it as well and being part of this. It was amazing to have the opportunity to work with New Focus Recordings on it. So
it's great to have it in the catalog. All right, take care, and
great.
see everybody soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.